In the sequence tool, you can click File and click Export. So export saves the image as a portable network graphics format. So I'm going to export this from the sequence, and now I should be able to open it in my sort of like a picture viewer somewhere in my system. So here now we can try to maybe zoom in a little bit using this format. And it's important to realize that this is where we started with this sample, and so we had demonstrated a class diagram for Abstract Factory, and now of course what we demonstrated with the sequence diagram is that basically, as we mentioned, the sequence diagram captures the typical development of interaction between the objects within a single scenario in a use case. So here we're just trying to demonstrate an example of using Abstract Factory. So this is sort of like an actual implementation of the method calls that we decided to use here using the set of classes, the actual data structure that we designed. So sequence diagram shows an interaction of the classes that we have in the system right here. So basically across the top, as we decided to have our visitor shopper factory right here and visitor emergency factory right here. So these classes appear at the top of our sequence diagram position horizontally, and they're called participants, and each participant has the vertical lifeline that basically represents the timeline of the calls in and out of this object, and general ordering, the sequence of all methods that we call inside the lifelines is interpreted obviously going from top to bottom. So each lifeline has something that's called an activation bar. So these green rectangular shapes on top of our lifelines are called activation bars, and they show when our participants begin to participate in interaction. It's also important to realize that this entire set of calls that we show, all these operations involving all of our classes, are basically happening during the call into the main. I purposely show the system. This is our Java virtual machine that makes a call into this Java application example. And main app is a class that has static main method. And so the entire demonstration happens as part of the execution of the main method. And so from the main method, we begin to make calls into other parts of the system. So when an operation name is the same as the name of the class, of course, here is the constructor. And so here we construct one object, we construct another object, and technically speaking, the life cycle of our objects here begin after we call the constructor. So technically speaking, visitor shopper, a lifeline, begins right here, right? So it really starts after the construction is invoked. So I'm just trying to kind of show it on the diagram to show you that it did not exist here, but then as soon as we call the constructor, the object now is in memory and we can show it on our timeline. Likewise, right here, the simulation scenario, basically its creation right here, and so its lifeline starts from this point on and goes down like this. And finally, the third object that we create is factory visitor emergency, which we're doing somewhere here again. From the main method we call the constructor. So its lifeline begins right here. Okay, so it continues down. So basically this is where we create the objects, and so it may be possible with some sequence diagramming tools actually not to show these connections, not to display these things before the object is actually getting created. Now, another important thing that I want you to note is that, of course, there should be pretty consistent correspondence between the class diagram and the sequence diagram if we want to make them as valid tools to work on our system design. So, of course, if we use specific names for classes, specific data attributes, and of course the operations, you should be able to locate this name in the class diagram and vice versa, class diagram versus sequence diagram. And of course the names of methods should match. So for instance, if this is create visitors, and of course it belongs to the scenario class, so it should be available and there. So this is create visitors. So this is the actual call into this method. And of course the caller is the main method in our system, and the method that we call is inside simulation scenario. Likewise, when the next part here shows that we call create visitor, of course belongs to the interface of the factory. And here, create visitor, we do indeed have operations available in this interface. Of course, as we look at the implementation of these classes, this diagram implies that these operations, of course, are implemented by every box in this hierarchy. So therefore, when we make this call, create visitor right here, so this is create visitor implemented by the factory visitor shopper. So that's also pretty consistent with our actual design, the structure of our classes, and in the sequence diagram. One weakness of the sequence diagrams is that, of course, we primarily focus on our structure. So this is sort of like a primary set of classes that we want to rely on when we're developing the software. The sequence diagram is sort of like secondary to this, and it displays only specific scenario. We can have alternative scenarios, so there could be a different sequence diagram associated with the same objects, even within the same use case. However, so this creates a bit of a difficulty maintaining the sequence diagrams current, because if we start making changes in the design of our interfaces and classes, of course, it's an additional burden to keep the sequence diagrams corresponding to now changed implementation of use cases. Keep it up to date. So that may be a challenge. One of the possibilities is just to sometimes to discard the old sequence diagrams and just simply redo them according to the latest modifications of our class diagrams. So this is a challenge to basically keep everything current and keep everything in sync.